The morning light filtered through the sheer curtains of our suburban Denver home, casting gentle shadows across the hardwood floors I'd spent countless hours maintaining, polishing, and perfecting. Every beam of sunlight revealed not a single speck of dust, a testament to the meticulous care I'd poured into our 200-square-foot colonial home for the past 15 years. I was in the kitchen, my domain, preparing breakfast for Michael and our 2 teenagers, Emma and Jake, when I heard the familiar jingle of keys at the front door. It was Tuesday, 7:30 a.m. sharp, Michael's usual departure time for his job at Henderson & Associates, the prestigious accounting firm in downtown Denver, where he'd climbed the ladder to senior partner. The kitchen was my masterpiece. Granite, countertops I'd researched for 3 months to find the perfect balance of beauty and budget. Custom cabinets painted in a warm sage green that I'd hand-selected after visiting 12 different paint stores, and stainless steel appliances that gleamed under the pendant lighting I'd convinced Michael to install after the kitchen renovation in 2018. Every morning, I followed the same ritual. Fresh squeezed orange juice for Emma. She was on the debate team and needed the vitamin C. Protein-packed smoothie for Jake. Soccer season demanded peak nutrition. And perfectly brewed dark roast coffee for Michael. Exactly 2 sugars, splash of cream, served in his lucky mug, the one I'd bought him for his first promotion. But today was different. Instead of his usual rushed goodbye and coffee-to-go routine, he lingered. I could feel his presence behind me as I flipped pancakes on the griddle, the spatula trembling slightly in my hand. A tremor that had nothing to do with the weight of the utensil, and everything to do with the strange energy radiating from my husband. Something in the air felt charged, electric with unspoken tension, like the moment before a summer thunderstorm when the atmosphere becomes heavy and oppressive. Lisa. His voice was flat, devoid of the warmth that had once made my heart skip during our college days at the University of Colorado. We need to talk. I turned around slowly, my favorite apron, the one with tiny blue flowers that Emma had given me for Mother's Day 3 years ago, still tied around my waist, and saw him standing there with a manila envelope in his hands. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his navy blue tie askew, despite the fact that he'd always been meticulous about his appearance. Michael Patterson, the man who ironed his shirts the night before and polished his shoes every Sunday, looked disheveled and uncomfortable. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold. They held a coldness I'd never seen before. Not even during our worst arguments about money or the kids' schedules, or his increasingly long hours at the office. "What's that?" I asked, though something deep in my gut already knew. The same instinct that had warned me when Emma had appendicitis at age 12, when Jake had broken his arm but tried to hide it, when our golden retriever Max was sick despite acting normal. That mother's intuition that had guided me through 15 years of family crises was screaming danger. Divorce papers. The words fell between us like stones into still water, creating ripples that would soon become waves, tsunamis that would reshape the landscape of our family forever. "I've already filed. You'll need to sign these." The spatula clattered to the floor, the metallic sound echoing through our spacious kitchen like a gunshot. 15 years. 15 years of marriage, of building a life together brick by brick, of raising our children from infants to teenagers, of being his partner in everything from midnight feedings to college planning sessions. And he was ending it with the same casual tone he used to discuss grocery lists or weekend plans or whether we needed to call the landscaper about the sprinkler system. "Michael, what are you talking about? We didn't even fight last night. We watched Netflix together, that new crime series you said you wanted to see. You helped Jake with his algebra homework at the kitchen table. You told me the salmon I made was delicious." My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, higher-pitched, desperate, like a stranger pleading for her life. We talked about Emma's college, applications. You said you were proud of how well she was handling the stress. He set the envelope on the granite countertop, the same counters I'd researched for months, visiting showrooms across Denver, comparing prices, reading reviews, measuring, and remeasuring to make sure we got the best value for our renovation budget. His fingers drummed against the cold stone surface, a nervous habit I'd watched him develop during tax season stress over the years. I've been thinking about this for a while, Lisa. We've grown apart. I need something different. His words were rehearsed, practiced, like a speech he'd been perfecting in front of his bathroom mirror. This isn't working anymore. Different? The word felt like acid on my tongue, burning as it escaped my lips. What's different? What's wrong with us, with our family, with our life? I gestured around the kitchen, at the family photos on the refrigerator, at the bulletin board where I kept track of everyone's schedules, at the evidence of the life we'd built together. We have 2 amazing kids, a beautiful home, financial security. We just celebrated our anniversary 3 months ago. Michael straightened his tie with mechanical precision, already mentally checking out of this conversation, of our marriage, of me. His eyes wouldn't meet mine, instead focusing on some point over my left shoulder. Look, I know this is hard, but it's better this way. Clean break. The kids are old enough to understand. They'll adjust. Understand what, exactly? Emma's voice cut through the kitchen like a knife, sharp and accusatory. Our 16-year-old daughter stood in the doorway, her school backpack slung over one shoulder, her long brown hair, so much like mine at that age, falling in waves around her face. Her green eyes, inherited from Michael, were wide with shock and growing anger. Behind her, 14-year-old Jake peered around the corner, his blonde hair still messy from sleep, his eyes wide with the kind of confusion that comes from overhearing something your teenage brain isn't quite ready to process. The silence stretched unbearably, thick and suffocating, like the humidity before a Denver storm. The kitchen clock, a wedding gift from Michael's mother that I'd always secretly hated, but kept because it mattered to him, ticked loudly in the sudden quiet. Somewhere in the distance, our neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez was already mowing her lawn, the sound of the engine providing an absurd soundtrack to the implosion of our family. Michael cleared his throat, the sound harsh and artificial. Emma, Jake, come sit down. Your mother and I need to explain something important to both of you. What followed was the most surreal 20 minutes of my life. Michael, with the same methodical approach he used for tax returns and financial planning, explained to our children that their parents were getting divorced. He used phrases like mutual decision and better for everyone involved, lies that tasted bitter in the air, lies that I didn't have the strength to contradict in front of Emma and Jake, because I couldn't bear to shatter their world anymore. Then it was already breaking. Emma's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally a cold acceptance that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. She was only 16, but she had her father's analytical mind and her mother's emotional intelligence. I could see her processing the information, filing it away, already starting to build walls to protect herself from the pain. Jake just stared at the floor, his teenage bravado crumbling like a sandcastle in the surf. At 14, he was all arms and legs and awkward energy, still young enough to need the security of an intact family, but old enough to understand that his world was about to change forever. Emma's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally, a cold acceptance that broke my heart. Jake just stared at the floor, his teenage bravado crumbling. "Who's going to live where?" Emma asked, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "We'll figure all that out," Michael said, standing and grabbing his briefcase. "I have to get to work. Lisa, look over those papers. My attorney will be in touch." And just like that, he was gone. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a slam would have. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of our morning routine, half-cooked pancakes growing cold on the griddle, coffee still brewing, lunchboxes waiting to be packed, and felt my entire world tilt on its axis. Emma wrapped her arms around me, and I could feel her shoulders shaking. Jake joined us, creating a small huddle of devastation in the middle of our kitchen. "Mom," Emma whispered, "are you going to be okay?" The question hung in the air as I held my children close, breathing in their familiar scents, feeling the weight of their need for reassurance. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I pulled back, looked both of them in the eyes, and said with more conviction than I felt, "Yes, sweetheart, we're all going to be okay." After the kids left for school, I sat alone at my kitchen table with the divorce papers spread before me. The legal language was dense and cold, but one thing was crystal clear. Michael was asking for primary custody of the children and wanted to keep the house. He was offering me what he called reasonable alimony for 2 years, a sum that wouldn't even cover rent in a decent apartment. That's when I saw it, buried in the financial disclosure section. Michael had listed my contribution to our marriage as N.A. housewife, not homemaker, not domestic engineer, not even stay-at-home mother, just N.A. housewife, as if the last 15 years of my life had been nothing more than an extended vacation. The rage hit me like a physical force. My hands began to shake. Not from fear this time, but from pure, crystalline fury. N.A.? Not applicable? I'd managed every aspect of our household, raised our children, supported his career moves, entertained his clients, balanced budgets, coordinated schedules, and somehow my contribution was not applicable. I walked to my home office, a converted bedroom where I'd spent countless hours managing our family's life, and opened my filing cabinet. What I found there would soon become my secret weapon, though I didn't know it yet. For 15 years, I'd kept meticulous records, every receipt, every bill, every expense report, every late-night fever watch with the kids, logged in my planner. Every client dinner I'd hosted, every business trip I'd supported by managing everything at home, every dollar I'd saved through careful budgeting and smart shopping. It was all there, documented with the precision of an accountant's wife. As I flipped through folder after folder, a plan began to form. Michael thought he could dismiss me as just a housewife, reduce my value to nothing. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd hoped I'd never need. "Martinez and Associates, how can I help you?" "I need to speak with Diana Martinez, please. Tell her Lisa Patterson is calling about a divorce case." Diana Martinez had been my study partner in college, before life took us in completely different directions like diverging paths in the Rocky Mountains. While I'd chosen marriage and family, the traditional route that so many women of our generation had followed, she'd built a reputation as one of Denver's most formidable divorce attorneys. Her office in downtown Denver occupied the entire top floor of a gleaming 40-story high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Rocky Mountains that stretched from Pikes Peak to Long's Peak. The office itself was a testament to her success. Rich mahogany furniture, Persian rugs, original artwork on the walls, and a conference table that could seat 20 people for complex legal negotiations. "Lisa Patterson," Diana said, rising from behind her massive mahogany desk, with a smile that quickly faded as she took in my appearance. I hadn't slept in 3 days, hadn't bothered with makeup, and was wearing the same jeans and sweater I'd thrown on when I called her office in desperation. "You look like hell." I managed a weak laugh, the first genuine sound I'd made since Michael had walked out of our house with his suitcase 3 days earlier. "Thanks. That's exactly what every woman wants to hear when she's about to become a divorce statistic." Diana's expression softened immediately. She'd always been direct. It's what made her such a successful attorney, but never cruel. During our college years at CU, she'd been the one who told me honestly when my boyfriends were jerks, when my papers needed more work, when my choices weren't serving my best interests. Now, 20 years later, I needed that same brutal honesty more than ever. "Sit down. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning, and don't leave out any details, no matter how small they seem." For the next hour and a half, I poured out the story of my marriage's sudden and devastating end. Diana listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on her yellow legal pad with a Mont Blanc pen, the same type she'd coveted in college but couldn't afford on her work-study budget. When I finished, she leaned back in her leather chair and studied me with sharp, calculating eyes that reminded me why she'd graduated summa cum laude from law school. "Let me get this straight," she said, her voice taking on the edge that had made her famous in Denver legal circles. "Michael filed for divorce without any warning, wants primary custody of your children, wants to keep the house that you've been maintaining and improving for 15 years, and listed your contribution to the marriage as N.A. housewife? That's right." The words still stung every time I said them. "And you've been out of the traditional workforce for 15 years, but you've been managing the household, raising 2 children, and supporting his career?" "Yes. I left my job at the marketing firm when Emma was born. Michael said we could afford for me to stay home, and we both agreed it would be better for the children to have a parent available full-time." Diana's smile was predatory, the same expression she'd worn in college when she'd found a weakness in her debate opponent's argument. "Oh, Lisa, your husband just made a very expensive mistake, the most expensive mistake of his life." Over the next 3 weeks, Diana and I worked together to build what she called the case of the century. It started with my filing system, those meticulous records I'd kept for 15 years that Michael had always teased me about. "You keep receipts for everything," he used to say, laughing. "What are you going to do, audit our marriage?" If only he'd known how prophetic those words would become. "This is absolutely incredible," Diana said during our second meeting, spreading documents across her conference table like a detective laying out evidence for a murder case. "Lisa, you have documentation for literally everything. Look at this. You tracked every late-night fever watch, every school event, every extracurricular activity, every doctor's appointment, every parent-teacher conference. You have receipts for every household expense, proof of every dollar saved through couponing and smart shopping, records of every home improvement project you managed." The evidence was overwhelming when laid out systematically. I had 15 years of calendars showing my daily schedule: wake up at 5:30 a.m., prepare breakfast for the family, pack lunches, drive Emma to debate practice, drive Jake to soccer, grocery shopping, with detailed lists and receipt comparisons to track savings, meal planning, homework supervision, laundry, cleaning, bill paying, appointment scheduling, and somehow fitting in volunteer work at the kids' schools and the community center. We quantified my contributions in ways I'd never imagined possible. The hours I'd spent managing the household, an average of 60 hours per week, meticulously tracked in my daily planners, would have cost $52,000 annually to replace with hired help. Diana had researched the going rates for housekeepers, nannies, personal assistants, and household managers in the Denver metro area. My meal planning and shopping, including the time I spent researching deals, using coupons, and comparison shopping, had saved the family an estimated $8,000 per year compared to dining out or buying convenience foods. The childcare I'd provided was worth approximately $15,000 annually per child, based on local daycare and nanny rates. "But that's just the beginning," Diana said, her eyes gleaming with the intensity that had made her legendary in family law. "Tell me about Michael's career. How did your role as a housewife—" She said the word with deliberate emphasis, making it sound like the powerful position it actually was. Support his professional advancement. That's when the real story emerged, the story that would ultimately destroy Michael's case and transform my life. For 15 years, I'd been Michael's secret weapon in the business world, though neither of us had ever acknowledged it in those terms. I'd researched his clients before important meetings, spending hours on the internet learning about their businesses, their competitors, their personal interests. I'd helped him prepare for presentations, proofreading his proposals, and suggesting improvements. I'd entertained business associates in our home, hosting dinner parties that were carefully orchestrated business events designed to build relationships and close deals. "Remember the Henderson account?" I asked Diana during one. of our sessions. Michael's biggest client? He landed that deal after a dinner party I hosted in our home. I spent 3 days preparing, researching Mrs. Henderson's dietary restrictions, finding the perfect wine pairing, even arranging flowers that matched their company colors. Michael closed a $2.3 million deal that night. Diana's pen flew across her notepad. How many of these client dinners did you host? 47 over the years. I have photos, menus, guest lists, everything. And business trips? Countless. Every time Michael traveled, I managed everything at home. Kids' schedules, household emergencies, even handling his personal calls and emails when needed. I was essentially his unpaid personal assistant. As the evidence mounted, Diana's excitement grew. Lisa, you weren't just a housewife. You were a full-time household manager, childcare provider, personal assistant, event coordinator, and business partner. Your husband's career success was built on your unpaid labor. We also discovered something else. Michael's assets were more substantial than he'd initially disclosed. Through careful investigation, Diana uncovered investment accounts, retirement, funds, and even a small property in Aspen that Michael had somehow forgotten to mention in his financial disclosure. "This is fraud," Diana said, her voice tight with anger. "He's trying to hide assets while portraying you as a financial burden. We're going to destroy him in court." The most damaging evidence, however, came from an unexpected source. While going through old tax returns, I found something that made my blood run cold. For the past 5 years, Michael had been claiming significant tax deductions for home office expenses. Except the home office was the space I used for managing our household. He'd been profiting financially from my worthless contributions, while simultaneously dismissing them as meaningless. "He's been double-dipping," Diana explained, "taking tax benefits for the space you used, while claiming your work has no value. This is going to look really bad in court." As we prepared for the hearing, Diana coached me on what to expect. Michael's attorney is going to try to paint you as a spoiled housewife who contributed nothing to the marriage. They'll argue that you lived off Michael's hard work while lounging around the house. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the 5 a.m. mornings getting kids ready for school, the midnight runs to the emergency room, the countless sacrifices I'd made for our family. "Let them try," I said. "I have 15 years of receipts that say otherwise." Diana grinned. "That's my girl. Now let's talk about what we're going to ask for in court." The list was extensive. 50% of all marital assets, including the hidden ones. Alimony calculated to reflect my true contribution to Michael's career, primary custody of the children, and compensation for the 15 years of unpaid labor that had enabled Michael's success. "He called you just a housewife," Diana said as we finished our preparation. "By the time we're done, the judge is going to understand exactly what that means and exactly how much it's worth." 3 days before the hearing, Michael called me directly. A clear violation of the no-contact order Diana had secured, and a move that would prove to be another costly mistake in his rapidly growing collection of legal blunders. "Lisa, this is getting completely out of hand." His voice was strained, panicked, so different from the confident tone he'd used when serving me divorce papers just 4 months earlier. "My attorney says you're asking for ridiculous amounts. This is insane. Be reasonable here." "Reasonable?" I said, my voice steady and calm for the first time since this nightmare began. Like listing my contribution as N.A. was reasonable? Like trying to hide $400,000 in assets was reasonable? Like claiming that 15 years of unpaid labor was worthless was reasonable? You know what I meant. You didn't work outside the home. You didn't have a real job. I worked every single day for 15 years, Michael. 60 hours a week, on average. The difference is, I wasn't paid for it. That's about to change. The confidence in my own voice surprised me. 4 months ago, I would have been crying, pleading, trying to save our marriage. Now I was a warrior armed with evidence, and determination. The line went quiet for a long moment. I could hear traffic in the background. He was probably calling from his car, sitting in the parking lot of his apartment complex, the same complex where he'd moved in with his 28-year-old paralegal girlfriend, Sarah. Yes, Diana had uncovered that detail too, along with the credit card receipts showing expensive dinners and hotel stays that predated our separation by 6 months. Lisa, please, think about the kids. This doesn't have to be a war. We can work something out privately without dragging this through court. You're absolutely right, I said, looking out the window of my home office at the garden I'd spent years cultivating. At the swing set Michael and I had assembled together when the kids were little. At the life I'd built that he was trying to dismiss as worthless. It doesn't have to be a war. It's going to be a reckoning. I hung up and immediately called Diana to report the contact violation. She was delighted, her voice practically vibrating with excitement. He's panicking, she said. Good. Panicked. People make mistakes, and we're going to capitalize on every single one of them. This phone call just gave us another piece of evidence that he's trying to manipulate and intimidate you outside of proper legal channels. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I walked through our house, my house, touching surfaces I'd cleaned thousands of times, looking at photos of family vacations I'd planned and organized, remembering birthday parties I'd thrown, holiday meals I'd prepared, sick days I'd managed alone while Michael was at the office building his career on the foundation of my unpaid labor. In Emma's room, I found a journal entry she'd left open on her desk, probably intentionally, knowing I'd see it during my nightly check that both kids were asleep and safe. I can't believe Dad thinks Mom did nothing all these years, she'd written in her careful script. Mom is literally the reason our family worked. She's the reason I never missed a debate tournament, the reason Jake never missed a soccer game, the reason Dad could work late without worrying about us. She's the reason we always had clean clothes and good food and help with homework, and someone to talk to when we were scared or sad. If that's nothing, then I don't understand what everything is supposed to look like. I closed the journal with tears in my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pride. My daughter understood. My son understood. And tomorrow, Judge Morrison would understand too. The Jefferson County Courthouse buzzed with the usual mix of lawyers, clients, and court personnel on the crisp Thursday morning of our hearing. The building itself was an imposing structure of red brick and granite, built in the 1980s with the kind of institutional architecture designed to inspire both respect and fear. I sat in the marble-tiled hallway outside courtroom 3B, wearing my best navy suit, the one I'd bought 3 years ago for Michael's company Christmas parties, where I'd smiled and made small talk with his colleagues while he networked and advanced his career, and clutching a thick manila folder containing 15 years of documentation that would soon change my life forever. Diana sat beside me, her own power suit immaculate, reviewing her notes one final time with the focused intensity of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. She'd worn her lucky red shoes, Louboutins that she claimed had never lost a case, and her confidence was infectious. Around us, other divorce cases were being resolved with handshakes and settlements, but I could tell from the energy surrounding our case that this would be different. This would be a battle. Remember, Diana said softly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been in this exact situation hundreds of times before. Stay calm, answer directly, and let the evidence speak for itself. Judge Morrison has been on the bench for 20 years. She's seen every trick in the book, heard every sob story, witnessed every legal maneuver, and she doesn't suffer fools gladly. She's also known for her fairness and her particular sensitivity to cases involving financial manipulation and hidden assets. Across the hallway, Michael sat with his attorney, James Whitfield, a slick corporate lawyer in a $3,000 suit who specialized in protecting wealthy men's assets during divorce proceedings. Whitfield had a reputation for aggressive tactics and creative interpretations of financial disclosure laws. His offices occupied an entire floor of one of Denver's most prestigious buildings, and his client list read like a who's who of Colorado business leaders seeking to minimize their divorce settlements. Michael looked confident, even smug, occasionally, glancing my way with what I could only describe as pity mixed with condescension. He clearly believed this would be a simple matter of dividing assets between a successful businessman and his unemployed wife. He dressed for the part, his best, charcoal gray suit, the Hermes tie I'd given him for his last birthday, gold cufflinks that had belonged to his father. Everything about his appearance screamed success and respectability, while I was supposed to be the pitiful housewife begging for scraps, if only he knew what was coming. "Patterson versus Patterson," the bailiff called, his voice echoing through the marble corridors. "Court is now in session," the Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison presiding. Judge Morrison was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She had the bearing of someone who had heard every sob story and legal maneuver imaginable and had little patience for games or grandstanding. Her reputation in Denver legal circles was legendary, fair but tough, particularly when it came to cases involving financial deception or the undervaluation of spousal contributions. She settled into her chair with practiced efficiency, arranging her papers with the precision of someone who'd done this thousands of times before. The courtroom itself was smaller than I'd expected from watching legal dramas on television. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lighting, and rows of benches that were mostly empty except for a few other attorneys waiting for their cases to be called. "Good morning," Judge Morrison said, her voice carrying easily through the room. "This is a divorce proceeding with matters of asset division, custody, and spousal support to be determined. Mr. Whitfield, you may begin with your opening statement." Michael's attorney stood and launched into what Diana had predicted would be his opening strategy. A carefully crafted narrative designed to minimize my contributions while maximizing Michael's importance. Whitfield moved with practiced confidence, his gestures calculated for maximum impact. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of asset division between a successful businessman and a woman who chose not to work during their marriage. My client, Michael Patterson, has built a highly successful career in accounting over the past 20 years, earning a substantial income that has provided his family with a comfortable upper-middle-class lifestyle in one of Denver's most desirable neighborhoods." I felt my jaw clench at his words, but Diana's hand on my arm kept me steady. Mrs. Patterson, while certainly a devoted mother, made the choice to remain unemployed throughout their 15-year marriage. Whitfield continued, his tone suggesting that staying home with children was some kind of extended vacation. "She has not contributed financially to the household income, has not maintained professional skills or credentials, and has not participated in the family's wealth-building activities beyond basic household management." The phrase basic household management hit me like a slap. Basic? There was nothing basic about coordinating two teenagers' schedules, managing a household budget, maintaining a 3,200-square-foot home, or providing the kind of behind-the-scenes support that had enabled Michael's career advancement. "Mr. Patterson is willing to provide reasonable spousal support for a transitional period of 2 years," Whitfield continued, allowing Mrs. Patterson adequate time to re-enter the workforce and become self-sufficient. "However, Mrs. Patterson's demands are excessive and unrealistic. She's asking for compensation for what she calls unpaid labor. But, Your Honor, managing one's own household and caring for one's own children is simply part of being a spouse and parent, not grounds for financial compensation. It would be like asking for payment for breathing or sleeping." When it was Diana's turn, she stood slowly, deliberately, like a predator who had been patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The silence in the courtroom was complete. Even the court reporter seemed to hold her breath. "Your Honor," Diana began, her voice carrying a quiet authority that immediately commanded attention. "What we have here is not a case of a woman seeking excessive compensation, but rather a case of a man attempting to defraud both his wife and this court by grossly undervaluing her contributions to their marriage and his career success." She gestured to the boxes of evidence we'd brought, 4 banker's boxes filled with 15 years of meticulous documentation. Mrs. Patterson was not unemployed, Your Honor. She was a full-time household manager, childcare provider, personal assistant, event coordinator, and business partner, whose unpaid labor enabled Mr. Patterson to build his career without the distractions and responsibilities that typically limit professional advancement for parents. Judge Morrison leaned forward slightly, her interest clearly piqued. Ms. Martinez, I'm very interested in this documentation you mentioned. Please proceed with your presentation of evidence. What followed was the most satisfying 3 hours of my life. What we have here is not a case of a woman seeking excessive compensation, but rather a case of a man attempting to defraud both his wife and this court by grossly undervaluing her contributions to their marriage and his career success. She gestured to the boxes of evidence we'd brought. Mrs. Patterson was not unemployed, Your Honor. She was a full-time household manager, childcare provider, personal assistant, event coordinator, and business partner whose unpaid labor enabled Mr. Patterson to build his career. We have documentation to prove not only the scope of her contributions, but also their monetary value. Judge Morrison leaned forward slightly. Ms. Martinez, I'm interested in this documentation. Please proceed. What followed was the most satisfying 3 hours of my life. Diana began by calling me to the witness stand. Under her questioning, I methodically laid out my daily routine during our marriage, the 5 a.m. wake-ups to prepare breakfast and lunch for the family, the coordination of children's schedules that required the organizational skills of a Fortune 500 executive, the management of household finances that would have impressed any CFO, maintenance coordination that saved us thousands annually, and endless logistical details that kept our family functioning like a well-oiled machine. Mrs. Patterson, Diana said, can you tell the court how you documented these activities over the past 15 years? I kept detailed records, I replied, opening the first folder with hands that were surprisingly steady. Every expense, every activity, every hour spent on household management, every business-related task I performed to support my husband's career. I have 15 years of comprehensive documentation. And why did you keep such detailed records? I smiled slightly, glancing at Michael, whose confident expression was beginning to crack. My husband is an accountant, Your Honor. He taught me the importance of keeping good records for tax purposes and family budgeting. He always said, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. I never imagined I'd need them for this purpose, but his professional advice turned out to be very valuable. Diana then began presenting evidence with the precision of a master surgeon performing a complex operation. She showed the court my time logs, demonstrating that I worked an average of 60 hours per week managing our household, more than most full-time executive positions. She presented receipts and expense reports showing how my careful budgeting and smart shopping had saved our family thousands of dollars annually. Every coupon clipped, every sale hunted down, every comparison shop documented. Your Honor, Diana said, holding up a thick folder that represented just 1 year of my record-keeping. Mrs. Patterson hosted 47 business dinners in their home over the course of their marriage. These weren't casual get-togethers. These were carefully orchestrated business events that directly contributed to Mr. Patterson's career advancement and his firm's bottom line. Judge Morrison leaned forward with obvious interest. Can you give us a specific example of how these dinners contributed to Mr. Patterson's career? Certainly, Your Honor. In March 2019, Mrs. Patterson hosted a dinner party for the Henderson Group, a potential client of Mr. Patterson's accounting firm. She spent 3 full days preparing, researching dietary restrictions and food allergies of all attendees, planning complimentary menus, shopping for ingredients, decorating the house to create an atmosphere conducive to business discussion, and coordinating every detail from wine pairings to background music. Diana pulled out a photograph showing our dining room transformed for the Henderson dinner. Elegant table settings, fresh flowers, candles, the works. Mr. Patterson closed a $2.3 million deal that night, earning his firm a substantial commission and boosting his career trajectory significantly. Mrs. Patterson received no compensation for her 3 days of intensive work, yet it directly contributed to a 7-figure business success. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his lawyer frantically taking notes, as Diana continued to present evidence of my business contributions. She showed emails I'd researched and drafted for Michael's clients, presentations I'd helped prepare with industry research and competitive analysis, and even thank-you notes from business associates praising the hospitality they'd received in our home. Furthermore, Your Honor, Diana continued, her voice gaining momentum like a prosecutor closing in on a guilty verdict. Mr. Patterson's tax returns show that he has claimed significant home office deductions for the space Mrs. Patterson used to manage household affairs and support his business activities. He has literally profited financially from her worthless labor, while simultaneously arguing in this court that her work has no monetary value. Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose sharply, and I saw her make a note on her legal pad with particular emphasis. Is this accurate, Mr. Whitfield? Michael's attorney shuffled through papers with obvious discomfort, clearly caught completely off guard by this revelation. Your Honor, those deductions were for legitimate business use of the home by Mrs. Patterson, Judge Morrison interrupted, her voice carrying a sharp edge. For work that Mr. Patterson claims in his filing has no economic value. Is that correct? Chateau. Courtroom fell silent except for the rustling of papers and the distant sound of traffic outside. You could have heard a pin drop, but Diana wasn't finished. She then presented evidence of Michael's hidden assets, the investment accounts he'd failed to disclose, the property in Aspen that had somehow been forgotten in his financial statements, and credit card accounts that showed suspicious patterns of spending. Your Honor, Mr. Patterson's attempt to hide substantial marital assets while portraying his wife as a financial burden represents a clear and deliberate pattern of deception designed to defraud both Mrs. Patterson and this court. He's attempting to benefit from 15 years of unpaid labor while claiming that labor has no value and simultaneously hiding the assets that labor helped create. When it came time for Michael to testify, Whitfield tried desperately to minimize my contributions and paint me as a woman of leisure. Your Honor, Mrs. Patterson chose to stay home and enjoy a comfortable lifestyle while my client worked long hours to support the family. She had the luxury of not working. Luxury, Judge Morrison interrupted, looking at the mountain of evidence spread across her bench. Mr. Whitfield, I'm looking at documentation of 60-hour work weeks, midnight emergency room visits, business, events that directly contributed to your client's success, and financial management that saved the family thousands of dollars annually. How exactly does this constitute luxury? Whitfield's face reddened as he struggled to find a response. Your Honor, I simply meant that she didn't have the stress of outside employment because she was providing full-time employment services to her family and her husband's business for free, Judge Morrison said dryly. Please continue. When Michael took the stand, he looked far less confident than when the day began. His expensive suit seemed to hang differently on him, and his usual commanding presence had deflated like a punctured balloon. Under Diana's cross-examination, he crumbled like a house of cards in a strong wind. Mr. Patterson, Diana said, approaching the witness stand with the measured pace of a predator circling wounded prey. You've claimed in your filing that your wife's contributions to your marriage have no monetary value, is that correct? Well, I mean, she didn't have a traditional job outside the home. That's not what I asked, and please answer the question directly. You listed her contribution as NA in your financial disclosure. Do you stand by that assessment that her contributions were not applicable, essentially worthless? Michael glanced desperately at his attorney, then back at Diana, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead despite the courthouse's efficient air conditioning. She took care of the house and kids, but that's what spouses do. And those services would have cost how much if you'd hired professionals to provide them instead of expecting your wife to work for free? I don't know. I never calculated it. Of course you didn't, Diana said with barely concealed disdain. Your Honor, we've calculated that Mr. Patterson would have paid approximately $97,000 annually to replace the services his wife provided for free. household management, childcare, personal assistance, event planning, and business support. Over 15 years. That's $455,000 in unpaid labor. The courtroom was absolutely silent. I saw Michael's face go pale, then red, then pale again as the reality of the number sank in. Furthermore, Diana continued relentlessly, Mr. Patterson's income increased by 340% during their marriage, directly correlated with the business support his wife provided. His current salary of $185,000 annually was built on a foundation of unpaid labor that he now claims has no value whatsoever. Michael's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. Judge Morrison had heard enough. She called for a recess, and when court reconvened an hour later, her expression was stern, and her decision was clearly made. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented today," she began, "and I must say, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of spousal contribution undervaluation I've seen in my 20 years on the bench." Michael's smugness had completely evaporated. "Mr. Patterson," Judge Morrison continued, "your attempt to characterize your wife as just a housewife, while simultaneously benefiting from her substantial contributions to your career and hiding marital assets is not only insulting, but potentially fraudulent." She paused, and I swear I saw the ghost of a smile cross her face. "Mrs. Patterson, your documentation is extraordinary. You've essentially provided this court with a masterclass in the economic value of domestic labor and spousal support." Judge Morrison's ruling was swift, decisive, and absolutely devastating to Michael's case. The silence in the courtroom was deafening as she delivered her judgment, with the precision of a skilled surgeon wielding a scalpel, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. "In the matter of Patterson versus Patterson," she began, her voice carrying the authority of 2 decades on the bench, "this court finds that Mrs. Patterson's contributions to the marriage were substantial, extensively documented, and financially significant. The evidence presented demonstrates not only 15 years of full-time domestic labor, but also direct and measurable contributions to Mr. Patterson's career advancement that resulted in quantifiable financial gain." I felt Diana squeeze my hand. Under the table as Judge Morrison continued, her words falling like hammer blows on Michael's hopes for a minimal settlement. "Mrs. Patterson is awarded 50% of all marital assets, including the property in Aspen that Mr. Patterson failed to disclose in his initial filing, a serious breach of financial disclosure requirements that borders on contempt of court." Michael's face went ashen. The Aspen property alone was worth $400,000, and his attempt to hide it had not only failed, but had clearly angered the judge. "Furthermore," Judge Morrison continued, consulting her notes with deliberate precision, "this court finds that Mrs. Patterson is entitled to spousal support calculated not on the basis of reasonable transitional support, as Mr. Patterson suggested, but on her documented contributions to Mr. Patterson's career advancement and the economic value of her unpaid labor. Spousal support is set at $4,200 per month for a period of 10 years, with automatic cost of living adjustments." The number hit like a thunderbolt. Over 10 years, that was more than $500,000, far more than the paltry $1,200 monthly, for 2 years that Michael had initially offered. I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling as I watched Michael's attorney frantically scribbling calculations on his legal pad. "Regarding custody," Judge Morrison said, "given Mrs. Patterson's documented role as primary caregiver and the children's clearly expressed preference to remain in their family home with their mother, Mrs. Patterson is awarded primary physical custody. Mr. Patterson will have standard visitation rights every other weekend and alternating holidays." But Judge Morrison wasn't finished. Her next words would become legend in Denver legal circles and would be quoted in family law textbooks for years to come. Finally, this court is compelled to address Mr. Patterson's characterization of his wife's contributions as N.A. housewife. "Mr. Patterson, your wife was not just a housewife. She was the CEO of your household, the CFO of your family's finances, the head of human resources for your children's development, the director of operations for your daily life, and your unpaid business partner whose labor directly and measurably contributed to your professional success." The judge paused, and this time her smile was unmistakable, a rare display of emotion from someone known for her judicial restraint. The fact that you failed to recognize the value of this work doesn't diminish its worth. It simply demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of partnership, economics, and basic human decency. I hope this ruling serves as an education not only for you, Mr. Patterson, but for anyone else who might consider dismissing spousal contributions as worthless simply because they don't come with a traditional paycheck. She banged her gavel with finality. Court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted in whispered conversations and the rustling of papers. Michael sat stunned, staring at the table in front of him as if he couldn't quite process what had just happened. His attorney was frantically scribbling notes, no doubt calculating the devastating financial damage to his client's wallet and his own reputation. Diana turned to me with a grin that could have powered the entire courthouse. "Lisa, that was absolutely beautiful." Judge Morrison basically gave him a masterclass in gender economics while simultaneously awarding you one of the largest spousal support settlements I've ever seen in a case like this. As we packed up our evidence, all those receipts and records that had seemed so mundane just hours earlier, but had proven to be worth their weight in gold, people approached us from around the courtroom. Other attorneys wanted to know about our documentation strategy and asked for copies of our filing system. A reporter from the Denver Post asked for an interview about the case. Even the court stenographer complimented the thoroughness of our presentation and said she'd never seen anything quite like it in 20 years of court reporting. But the most satisfying moment came as we were leaving the courthouse. Michael approached, me in the marble hallway, his expensive suit wrinkled, his confident demeanor completely shattered, looking like a man who'd just realized he'd made the most expensive mistake of his life. "Lisa," he said, his voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. This is going to bankrupt me. The spousal support alone, plus half the assets, plus the attorney fees. I don't know how I'm going to manage this." I looked at the man I'd been married to for 15 years, the father of my children, the person who had blindsided me with divorce papers just 4 months earlier. I searched my heart for hatred, for a desire for revenge, for the bitter satisfaction of seeing him suffer. But all I felt was a calm sense of justice served and a profound sense of my own worth finally being recognized. "No, Michael," I said quietly, my voice steady and sure. "This isn't going to bankrupt you. This is going to pay me what I was always worth. The only difference is that now the value of my work has been legally recognized instead of being taken for granted." He opened his mouth to say something else, perhaps to plead or argue or make excuses, but I held up my hand to stop him. 15 years, Michael. 15 years I supported your career, raised our children, managed our household, and contributed to every success you achieved. You called me just a housewife and tried to dismiss my contributions as worthless. Now you know better. Now everyone knows better. I started to walk away, then turned back one last time. "Oh, and Michael? The kids want to talk to you about the custody arrangement. Emma has some very strong thoughts about your characterization of stay-at-home mothers that I think you'll find educational. She's been accepted to Stanford's pre-law program, by the way. I wonder where she gets her sense of justice from." 1 month later, I was sitting in my home office, the same space where I'd kept those meticulous records for 15 years, when the phone rang. It was Diana, and her voice was buzzing with excitement. "Lisa, you're absolutely not going to believe this. I just got a call from a producer at 60 Minutes. They want to do a segment on your case. Apparently, it's being cited in law schools across the country as a landmark example of properly valuing domestic labor in divorce proceedings. Harvard Law School wants to use your documentation system as a case study." I laughed, looking around, at the filing cabinets that had become my secret weapons and were now becoming tools of empowerment for women everywhere. "Really? That's incredible." "Really. And that's not all. You've started something, Lisa. I've had 47 women call me in the past 3 weeks alone, all asking about documenting their contributions as housewives. You've given them a roadmap, a template, a way to prove their worth. 3 of them, have already filed for divorce using your methods. After we hung up, I walked to the kitchen where Emma was doing homework at the counter. At 17, she'd grown into a fierce young woman with strong opinions about gender equality, women's rights, and social justice. Her acceptance to Stanford had come with a full scholarship, something she'd achieved through her own hard work, but work that had been supported by my constant presence and encouragement. "Mom," she said, looking up from her calculus textbook. "Jessica's mom is getting divorced, and her dad is trying to pull the same just a housewife nonsense that Dad did. Jessica asked me what you did to prepare for court. I told her about your filing system and how you documented everything. I also gave her Diana's business card. Was that okay?" "Of course, sweetheart. That's exactly what we should be doing. Helping other women." Emma smiled, and I could see the future lawyer in her eyes. Good. Because I also told her that any woman who calls herself just a housewife is selling herself short, and that you taught me that every person's work has value, whether it comes with a paycheck or not. That evening, Jake found me in the living room, sorting through college brochures. At 15, he was already thinking about his future and had been recruited by several colleges for soccer, but he was also maintaining a 4.0 GPA and talking about studying business or economics. "Mom," he said, settling beside me on the couch. "I know Dad's been weird about money lately and keeps complaining about the settlement. But I want you to know, I get it now. I understand what you did for our family all those years, and I understand why the judge ruled the way she did." "What do you mean, honey?" "I mean, I used to think Dad was right, that you just stayed home while he worked and earned money. But after the court case and listening to all the evidence, I started paying attention to everything you actually do. The shopping, the cooking, the scheduling, the budgeting, the cleaning, helping with homework, dealing with our problems, managing our social lives, coordinating with teachers and coaches. You're like a one-person company running our entire lives." He paused, looking thoughtful in that way that reminded me so much of myself at his age. "I want to make sure that when I get married someday, I don't make Dad's mistake. I want to appreciate what my wife does, whether she works outside the house or not. And if she does work, I want to make sure we're true partners in everything." 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected phone call that would change my life in ways I never could have imagined. It was from Margaret Chen, a family law attorney in San Francisco who specialized in high-asset divorces. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, "I hope you don't mind the cold call, but I've been following your case closely. It's become quite famous in family law circles. I represent a client who's in a situation very similar to yours. 20 years of marriage, stay-at-home mother, husband claiming she contributed nothing of value to their success. I was wondering if you'd be willing to consult on her case." "Consult?" I asked, intrigued. "You've created a template for documenting domestic contributions that's revolutionizing how we approach these cases. Would you consider sharing your methods and perhaps helping us build our case? For a consulting fee, of course. I'm thinking $200 per hour to start." That phone call led to another, then another, then another. Within 6 months, I had developed a thriving consulting business helping women document their contributions as homemakers and stay-at-home mothers. I called it Worth Documentation Services, and the tagline was simple but powerful. "Every contribution has value. Let us help you prove it." The irony wasn't lost on me. Michael's attempt to diminish my worth had actually helped me discover my true value in an entirely new way. His dismissive phrase, "just a housewife," had become the catalyst for a business that was not only financially successful, but was also helping women across the country fight for the recognition and compensation they deserved. 2 years after the divorce, Emma was thriving at Stanford University. She'd chosen to study business and law with a focus on women's economic empowerment, and she'd already started a campus organization called Unpaid Labor Awareness that educated college students about the economic value of domestic work. Jake was excelling in high school, playing varsity soccer while maintaining his perfect GPA, and had started volunteering with a local organization that provided financial literacy education to single mothers. Michael and I had eventually found our way to a cordial co-parenting relationship. He paid his spousal support on time every month without complaint, perhaps because his attorney had warned him that any attempt to modify the judgment would likely result in even worse consequences. Though he'd initially been bitter about the settlement, he'd gradually come to understand that the court's ruling was not only fair, but had probably saved him from an even more expensive legal battle. He'd also started a new relationship with Amanda, a woman who worked as a high school principal, and he'd made a point of telling me during one of our custody exchanges how much he valued her career and her contributions to education. It seemed that Judge Morrison's lecture had indeed served as the education she'd intended. 3 years after that life-changing morning when Michael had served me divorce papers, I was sitting in my expanded home office. I'd converted the guest bedroom into a proper business space, when my phone rang with a call that would validate everything I'd fought for. It was Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a professor of family law at the University of Colorado Law School. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, "I'm calling because we'd like to invite you to speak at our annual family law conference next month. Your case has become a cornerstone of our curriculum on spousal contributions and economic valuation in divorce proceedings. We'd be honored to have you share your story with our students and the legal community." Standing at the podium of the law school auditorium a month later, looking out at an audience of professors, students, practicing attorneys, and judges, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Not just because I'd won my case, but because I'd helped change the conversation about the value of domestic work. When my husband called me just a housewife, I concluded my speech. He thought he was diminishing my worth. Instead, he helped me and thousands of other women discover our true value. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is underestimating you. It forces you to prove them wrong, and in doing so, you often surprise yourself with your own strength and worth. The applause was thunderous and sustained. Afterward, a young woman approached me, a recent law school graduate who specialized in family law and had started her own practice focused on protecting the rights of stay-at-home parents. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, her eyes bright with determination. "My mother was a stay-at-home mom for 25 years. When my parents divorced, she got almost nothing because she couldn't prove her worth. Your case changed everything for women, like her. I've used your documentation methods for 12 clients so far, and we've secured fair settlements for every single one. Thank you for showing us the way." As I flew home to Denver that evening, watching the Rocky Mountains come into view through the airplane window, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought me to this point. What had started as the worst day of my life, the day my husband blindsided me with divorce papers and dismissed me as worthless, had become the catalyst for discovering my own strength, worth, and purpose. I thought about all the women who had reached out to me over the past 3 years, sharing their stories of undervaluation and triumph. I thought about the judges who had started recognizing domestic labor as real work, deserving of real compensation. I thought about the attorneys who now advised their clients to document everything, no matter how small it seemed. I thought about the law schools that were teaching future lawyers to properly value spousal contributions. Most importantly, I thought about my children, who had learned that every person's contributions have value, regardless of whether they come with a traditional paycheck. They had seen firsthand that standing up for yourself and demanding fair treatment wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, respect, and recognition of human worth. When I arrived home that night, I found a note on my kitchen counter from Jake, who was now 18 and preparing for college on a full soccer scholarship. "Mom, thanks for teaching me that just is never just a word when it's used to diminish someone's worth. The world needs more people like you who stand up and fight for what's right. You changed our family, and now you're changing the world. Love." I smiled and tucked the note into my purse next to my business cards for Worth documentation services. Tomorrow, I had consultations scheduled with 3 more women who were ready to prove their worth. And the day after that, I was flying. to Chicago to testify as an expert witness in a divorce case where a woman's 20 years of domestic labor were being valued at zero. Michael had been wrong about so many things, but he'd been accidentally right about one. I really wasn't just a housewife. I was so much more than that. I was a warrior, an advocate, a business owner, and a catalyst for change. And it had taken his attempt to diminish me for me to fully realize just how valuable I truly was. The end. Marriage, stay-at-home mother, husband claiming she contributed nothing of value. I was wondering if you'd be willing to consult on her case. Consult? You've created a template for documenting domestic contributions that's revolutionizing how we approach these cases. Would you consider sharing your methods? For a fee, of course. That phone call led to another, then another. Within a year, I had developed a small consulting business helping women document their contributions as homemakers and stay-at-home mothers. I called it Worth Documentation Services, and the tagline was simple. Every contribution has value. The irony wasn't lost on me. Michael's attempt to diminish my worth had actually helped me discover my true value in an entirely new way. 2 years after the divorce, Emma was accepted to Stanford University. She planned to study business and law, with a focus on women's economic empowerment. Jake was thriving in high school, playing varsity soccer and maintaining a 4.0 GPA. Michael and I had found our way to a cordial co-parenting relationship. He paid his spousal support on time every month, and though he'd initially been bitter about the settlement, he'd gradually come to understand that the court's ruling was fair. He'd even started a new relationship with a woman who worked as a teacher, and he'd made a point of telling me how much he valued her career. On a crisp October evening, I was in my kitchen preparing dinner when the phone rang. It was Diana. Lisa, turn on Channel 7 News. You're not going to believe this. I grabbed the remote and flipped to the local news station. The anchor was introducing a story about the Housewife Revolution, a movement of women who were documenting their domestic contributions and demanding fair treatment in divorce proceedings. It all started, the anchor said, with a Denver woman who kept 15 years of receipts and proved that just a housewife was worth more than $1.4 million in unpaid labor. Now, women across the country are following her lead. The story featured interviews with 3 women who had used my documentation methods to secure fair divorces settlements. One woman in Phoenix had been awarded $2.8 million in assets and spousal support. Another in Miami had successfully argued for primary custody and substantial alimony based on her documented business contributions to her husband's medical practice. What started as one woman's fight for recognition, the reporter concluded, has become a movement that's changing how courts view domestic labor. The message is clear. Being just a housewife doesn't mean being just anything. It means being worth everything. As I watched the story, I thought back to that terrible morning when Michael had blindsided me with divorce papers. I remembered the shock, the fear, the feeling that my life was falling apart. I remembered him calling me just a housewife and dismissing 15 years of my life as worthless. But mostly, I remembered the moment when I opened my filing cabinet and realized that I had the power to prove him wrong. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, who was now in her sophomore year at Stanford. Mom, just saw the news story about you. Still can't believe Dad thought he could win against the woman who alphabetized our spice rack and tracked every family expense for 15 years. He clearly didn't know who he was dealing with. Love you. I smiled and typed back. Just a housewife indeed. 3 years later, I was invited to speak at a national conference on family law reform. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of attorneys, judges, and advocates, I shared the story of how 15 years of careful documentation had transformed my life and sparked a movement. When my husband called me just a housewife, I concluded he thought he was diminishing my worth. Instead, he helped me and thousands of other women discover our true value. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is underestimating you. It forces you to prove them wrong, and in doing so, You often surprise yourself with your own strength." The applause was thunderous. Afterward, a young woman approached me, a recent law school graduate who specialized in family law. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, "my mother was a stay-at-home mom for 20 years. When my parents divorced, she got almost nothing because she couldn't prove her worth. Your case changed everything for women like her. Thank you." As I flew home to Denver that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. What had started as the worst day of my life, the day my husband blindsided me with divorce papers, had become the catalyst for discovering my own strength and worth. I thought about all the women who had reached out to me over the past 3 years, sharing their stories of undervaluation and triumph. I thought about the judges who had started recognizing domestic labor as real work, deserving of real compensation. I thought about the attorneys who now advise their clients to document everything, no matter how small it seemed. Most importantly, I thought about my children, who had learned that every person's contributions have value, regardless of whether they come with a paycheck. When I arrived home that night, I found a note on my kitchen counter from Jake, who was now 18 and preparing for college. "Mom, thanks for teaching me that 'just' is never just a word when it's used to diminish someone's worth. The world needs more people like you. Jay." I smiled and tucked the note into my purse, next to my business cards for Worth Documentation Services.